Welcome to another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy, Week 2 in the CFL. Ian Cameron with you. No guest this week. It is a guest-free show. We're a little later than normal recording this show, so we decided we'd push our guest back that we were scheduled to have today back to next week. This is going to be a little bit of a quicker-paced show because we're running a bit behind, but that's no problem. We will get to all 4 CFL games in Week 2. We're going to jump right into it and not waste any time. We're going to start with Thursday night. By the way, I do want to mention before we get into it, I do want to promote Dub Club. There's the URL on the screen, dubclub.win/r/Bobano. As you can see, we are looking forward to a great CFL season on there. And again, you can get all sports 6 months for $400, which pretty much gives you the whole CFL season. If you sign up today, June the 12th, it means your subscription would run until December the 12th. So you would pretty much get with 6 months all sports the entire CFL season. Obviously, the rest of the NHL, Stanley Cup Final, and NBA Finals, the rest of the MLB season. You'll get most of NFL and college football, which are only a couple of months away. And it also would include the season win totals and futures report for both NFL and college football, which has been an annual tradition of mine, and it's been a very profitable endeavor as well. Start of NHL and NBA next season, college basketball starting next season, all of that, basically, if you sign up using the 6-month option at $400. So that will run you to December. Monthly is $75, 3 months $200, and 1 year at $750. And again, if you look at the current results for me in either the current sport, the current season, or the most recently completed season in every sport, right now I'm profitable in everything except MLB and UFC. They are the only 2 sports this calendar year where I am down. Every other sport, we've made money this year. Profitable seasons, combined 22.2 units of profit in NFL and college football last year, 3.6 units of profit CFL last year, combined with a winning week last week. In week 1 of the CFL, it was a profitable week. It was a really great weekend, 4-0 CFL weekend, Saturday, Sunday. We swept the board with those 2 games, Saskatchewan and the over against Edmonton, Toronto in the over against BC. So we're 4 units of profit CFL the last 2 years combined, which is $4,000 based on the way the unit structure and the money management structure works. Profitable in UFL, profitable in NHL, profitable in NBA, profitable in college basketball. So again, it's worth getting on board. 350 Dub Club subscribers right now. 350 people can't be wrong. And what you're going to get out of it is always a vision for the long term. There's going to be good days. There's going to be bad days. But the goal is always to be profitable long term. And I've managed to be able to do that over the years. So again, sign up for any all sports subscription package that you prefer. dubclub.win/r/Bobano. And again, the links to all the Dub Club subscriptions are also available on my Twitter X account, which, as you can see on the screen, is at Bobano Bets. So as I mentioned, it was a profitable week 1, and we're looking to carry that over here into week 2, and we'll begin with Thursday night football. The Ottawa Red Blacks, the only team that did not play in week 1, they get their season underway, hosting the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Winnipeg, 6.5-point road favorites, 46.5 the total here in this game. Winnipeg, what happened to them last week? Well, you have to ask yourself, I think, and that's the key handicapping fundamental question here. Was Winnipeg bad, and is that a sign of things to come? Or was it just a 1-week thing, and we really have to credit Montreal for the way they played last week against the Bombers? I will say this about Montreal. Everything they did on defense last season, when they got red hot down the stretch en route to winning the Grey Cup, they basically did it again last week. Forcing turnovers, blowing up the line of scrimmage, stopping the run, getting pressure on Zach Collaros, pass rush, stopping the run, forcing turnovers, ball hawking skills. Really, all of it was on display last week with that defense. They held Brady Oliveira to 38 yards rushing on 11 carries. Extremely impressive. That's barely over 3 yards per carry. Zach Collaros, no touchdown passes, 1 interception, only 209 passing yards. And to think that they only allowed 209 passing yards and that the Winnipeg only gained 209 passing yards when they were trailing most of the game even goes stronger to show how well Montreal defensively played. It was a great game. And then, of course, Winnipeg's defense, I thought they played pretty good. They held Fajardo to 254. They stopped the ground game of the Alouettes. Alouettes didn't really do much on the ground, but the one guy that could not stop Winnipeg on defense was Tyson Philpott, who was absolutely outstanding. 141 receiving yards, 10 catches, 2 touchdowns, including one where he got behind the entire Winnipeg secondary. And it is worth noting that Winnipeg secondary is a little bit younger this year. Could be some growing pains in that pass defense. Is that a sign of a bit of a decline for the Bombers this year? Or can they flip the script, turn the page, flip that switch, and look like they did for the majority of the last few years here in this game against Ottawa? I don't know if Winnipeg's truly on the decline yet. And I don't know how much better Ottawa is this season compared to last. But I am ready to say they will be a decent amount better. Simply because, look, Drew Brown is a guy that we don't know how he's going to play as a number one quarterback in the CFL. But what we do know is he's got talent. He's got ability. He's got a good arm. He's learned in a winning culture with the Bombers from one of the best in Zach Collaros. And he has been a relentless worker, to keep getting better. And he's ingratiated himself very well with his Ottawa teammates. Now, it's very interesting. You'll hear, that Drew Brown against Winnipeg, Winnipeg's defense knows him inside and out. Well, you can say Drew Brown knows Winnipeg's defense inside and out. He'll know where to attack them. And you could also say, obviously, Winnipeg's defense knows Drew Brown's tendencies, so maybe that's an advantage for them. We'll see how it plays out in this game. I'm not ready to just say Winnipeg is going to fall apart. They could easily bounce back this week and win this game by more than a touchdown. That totally wouldn't shock me. But when you look at Winnipeg and do a deeper dive, they did not play well on the road last year at times. Like, they had some really bad road performances. They lost to my Ticats on the road as 7-point favorites. They lost outright as 7-point favorites at Saskatchewan. They lost at Ottawa right here at TD Place Stadium last year. Ottawa pulled that incredible comeback against Winnipeg when they were down big, and they rallied all the way back, and they won 31-28 in overtime behind Dustin Crum at quarterback. And if you look at the last 3 head-to-head meetings, 2022, 2023 combined, all 3 of those games were decided by 7 points or less. So Winnipeg has not had an easy time of it against the Red Blacks. The thing that you want to watch for with Ottawa is the receiving core, bolstered this year with the addition of Dominique Rhymes from the BC Lions. It was a great addition. You look, Jalen Acklin is healthy. He was a guy that was carrying them at times as far as the receiving core last year. Braylon Addison is finally healthy to begin a year. Justin Hardy's capable. They like Khalil Pimpleton, this kid out of Central Michigan. There's some capability here at receiver for this Ottawa Red Blacks team. The O-line has to be better. There were clearly problems last year with that unit. We'll see if they can improve. That's still the area where they're a little bit, there's some questions coming into the year. But Drew Brown is mobile, and that's the one thing that will help, this offense a little bit. The defense was abysmal, absolutely awful for most of last year, giving up big points and yardage, and that is something they had to shore up. The defensive line coming into this year, if you look at it, we'll see if they can get a better pass rush. They're certainly hoping that's the case. The linebacking core with Jovan Santos Knox, we'll see how they fare with that group. The D-line, we'll see. The secondary, meanwhile, this is probably the strength of the team. They did have a lot of injuries in the secondary, but we're looking at Money Hunter should be healthy. They bring in a Darius Pickett from the Toronto Argonauts, which was just an absolutely huge addition. You got to hope Lorenzo Malden IV, who showed you some pass rush and ability to get to the quarterback last year for Ottawa, can continue to show that this year. I'm not sold this is a Winnipeg ass-kicking here in this game. I stepped in very early in the week, and I took Ottawa plus 7.5. I got a very good number. It's down to 6.5. Now, I am contemplating buying back a little Winnipeg. But I haven't decided yet. My initial position is Ottawa plus 7.5. I think it's a one-score game. I do. You could say is an advantage Winnipeg. They had a game under their belt, and there is definitely truth to the fact that Winnipeg didn't play anybody in the preseason, and that could have certainly contributed to that, horrendous performance against Montreal, and the fact Montreal's defense, as I talked about, is pretty good. But I think there may be more concerns than that with Winnipeg. And look who they're missing for this game. There's no Brady Oliveira. He's already been ruled out. Kenny Lawler suffered that injury last week in the first game. He's out. They do get Adam Big Hill back at linebacker. That's significant, but the secondary is still very green. There's a lot of new faces. I didn't love that the pass rush wasn't great. Jackson Jeffcoat retired. A couple changes on that D-line. Willie Jefferson didn't really seem to have that huge, big-time play defensively that we're accustomed. And remember, he's an older guy now, too. There's a lot of wear on the tires of this Winnipeg team as far as average age, and this core is aging. And maybe they can bounce back and win big, but I'm going to have to see it before I believe it, especially when you see what Winnipeg did on the road last year. That was their big problem. They'd win big at home, and then on the road they would, struggle to win and sometimes even get beaten as favorites. I mean, look at Winnipeg on the road last year. It really wasn't pretty. I mean, they lost, last year, their road numbers, after they started the year okay on the road, but, at Ottawa, they lose as big 10-point favorites. At Edmonton, 13-point favorites don't cover. At Calgary, they won by a single point, laying 4.5. I mean, they were just not very good covering numbers down the stretch on the road last year, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And again, 3 straight meetings of 7 points or less. And look, there were some issues on the line of scrimmage with Winnipeg. Now, the O-line struggled a bit to protect. They couldn't run the football. And when you get outplayed on the line of scrimmage, now Ottawa is no Montreal along the line of scrimmage. I will tell you that. But you have to have a high degree of efficiency and performance to, win by what's required here to cover this number. Well, especially when it was 7.5. Now it's 6.5. If you like Winnipeg, you're at least getting a better number. You're getting it below the 7. But for now, I'm sticking with my Ottawa plus 7.5 position. I did take over 46.5 in this game. I do think Winnipeg's offense will play a lot better, even without Oliveira and Lawler. There's still Wolotarski and Schoen and Dembski, and you still have some weapons to work with there. And Ottawa's defense still has so much that they have to improve on based on last year. But I think Ottawa can move the ball in this Winnipeg secondary in particular. Drew Brown does have a good arm, and with Dominique Rhymes now here from BC rather, that definitely strengthens that receiving core. They've got some pieces there with Ackland, with Addison, and with Rhymes. There's suddenly some good weapons now for Drew Brown to work with. So I do like the over a little bit here as well, 46.5. All right, let's go to Friday Night Football. Montreal, Edmonton. Alouettes 5-point road favorites, 47.5 the total. Look, Montreal was outstanding last week. At least defensively they were. I still think the offense could have done more, and I don't think the offense was spectacular. Cody Fajardo hit Tyson Philpott for the one big touchdown pass, but other than that, the offense was okay. It wasn't phenomenal. They couldn't run the ball against Winnipeg, and we talked about how they lost William Stanback in the season preview show, and they're down to Jeshrin Antwi and Walter Fletcher as their 2 running backs. But they definitely did show some signs of struggle, to run the ball, and it wasn't a consistently strong and fluid offensive performance. So it's not like Montreal was moving the ball up and down the field, against Winnipeg, but their defense was something else. And the job they did on the Bombers, stopping Oliveira, getting pressure on Zach Collaros, that is definitely a concern if you're Edmonton. Because if you look at the Elks in week 1 in their loss to Saskatchewan, 29-21, they couldn't run the ball well. And, there were some times when, an older, immobile McLeod Bethel Thompson was under pressure for them, and it was trouble. And now you got to face this vaunted Montreal defense. That could be an edge for Montreal's D-line, which is pretty good. Against that Edmonton O-line, which did show some vulnerability last week in their loss against Saskatchewan. On the flip side, the Edmonton defense until the fourth quarter played, pretty solid against Saskatchewan. It really wasn't until the fourth quarter that Trevor Harris and the Ryder passing attack really started to dent them with some big plays over the top. They did keep A.J. Ouellette in check. So I was impressed with the run defense, and I think that is important. Edmonton contained Ouellette to 40 yards on 18 carries. If Montreal can't run the ball here, can they have the same amount of success throwing it with Fajardo that maybe they did last week? That remains to be seen, because Edmonton did contain the Saskatchewan offense for 3 quarters. So the way I saw this coming in is that my first thought was, you know what? Clearly Montreal may be ready to prove to everybody that last year's run to the Grey Cup was not a fluke. It wasn't that they got red hot at the right time. It's that this was a good to potentially really good football team coming together at the right time and ready to carry it over into this season. But there's also a point of me that says, look at this spot for Montreal coming into this game. They had the huge road win against Winnipeg in a Grey Cup rematch last week. You look at their schedule after this. They go home to face Ottawa, which will be their home opener. It's going to be that night where finally they get home. They get their Grey Cup ceremony. And then in between the home opener, where they're going to get all the ceremony for their Grey Cup win from last year, they've got this game against Edmonton. And I don't want to say letdown spot, flat spot, but do I expect Montreal to be nearly as dialed in to play the Edmonton Elks Friday night as opposed to Winnipeg last week? No, I don't think they will be. Now, is Edmonton good enough to take advantage of that? That's also the question you have to ask yourself. It's an Edmonton team that's 0-5 straight up, 0-5 against the spread. Their last 5 games dating back to last year. Remember, they started to win those games in August and into September, and they started to go on a little straight up an ATS run, and then the bottom fell out again. And obviously, we saw them have just a terrible fourth quarter. But you also have to acknowledge that game going into the fourth quarter last week was 18-8 Edmonton. And then Edmonton added a field goal early in the fourth quarter to go up 21-8 with 13 minutes to go. They were up by 13 with 13 minutes to go and lost that game to Saskatchewan. So then you look at where this point spread is, and here's Edmonton they were getting a 6.5 early in the week. There's been some money coming in on Edmonton. And I feel Edmonton can be competitive in this game. I took Edmonton early in the week, plus 6.5. Again, it's another case where I got a very good number. At this number, I'd still lean Edmonton a little bit. It's getting down a little bit as far as where it is. My big concern, though, is McLeod Bethel Thompson against the defensive front. Like, it could be dead man walking for this guy because he has no mobility whatsoever. None. Zero. And last week, he really was guilty of hanging on to the football too much. He's got to get the ball out quicker going into this game. There's no question. Now, the secondary is also a concern for Edmonton, but I like their run defense, and I feel that if you make Cody Fajardo beat you through the air, and keep in mind, Tyler Snead, one of his key receivers, the kid out of East Carolina, he's already been ruled out. So that's one less option. Now, I know Philpott's been great. Julian Grant is very capable. There's no doubt. But I think this is a tricky spot. Second road game in a row, the home opener where they're going to get honored for their Grey Cup win next week against Ottawa. I think there's enough reason to think Edmonton can at least be competitive, keep this one pretty close. I did take plus 6.5 with Edmonton. I'd still lean in that direction. In a week where, again, 3-1 overs last week. And by the way, 4-0 against the spread were underdogs last week. So I guess it's not a total shock that I'm kind of liking the dogs here, at least in the first 2 games of this week 2 CFL slate. And look, not every underdog is going to cash, obviously. So eventually some favorites are going to start covering numbers, but it is worth noting 4-0 ATS for underdogs last week to go with the 3-1 mark to the over. But I just feel that Edmonton can do enough to be competitive here and keep this a really close game against Montreal. And again, if you take away Montreal's turnovers, which is easier said than done because it's an art and a skill, to be able to create turnovers like that. But I think Edmonton can do enough to stay in this number. I'm going to look at them. And again, as far as this total, for a week where I think there's going to be some overs here in week 2, I don't know if I like this one nearly as much. This is the one where I could see it being an under, so would probably have to lean that way. Montreal is not a team I'm rushing to bet over. Well, let's put it that way. Not with the way their defense is playing right now. All right, let's go to Saturday. And on Saturday, we have the Calgary Stampeders taking on the BC Lions. We've got the Lions 8-point home favorites, 50.5 the total. I think of all 4 games in week 1, I didn't see a line of scrimmage ass kicking on both sides of the ball to the extent that I saw from that BC Toronto game last week. BC's offensive line got destroyed by the Toronto Argonauts defensive front. There was pressure upon pressure all day long against Vernon Adams. He was under duress throughout the game. The pass protection was wretched. It was woeful. It was horrendous from the BC Lions. And the Argos blew up the line of scrimmage against the Lions O-line over and over again on Sunday in that Toronto win, upsetting the BC Lions as anywhere. Well, it opened, they were full touchdown home underdogs early in the week, and then they got bet all the way down to 3.5 before kickoff. But Toronto's defensive line owned BC's offensive line. And you could say the other way around, too, that Toronto's offensive line owned BC's defensive line. There was no pass rush. They didn't stop the run. Toronto just ran the ball right down BC's throat in that game last Sunday. So you're talking about the line of scrimmage being so important to success in football, being good on the O-line, being good on the defensive line. And when you look at those 2 position groups for BC last week, the blood and guts of the team, the offensive line, the defensive line, they got whipped, flat out, fucking whipped, both sides in that game against Toronto last week. Whipped. It was staggering to see it. Vernon Adams under complete pressure. I give Vernon Adams a hell of a lot of credit. He's pretty tough because he got hit over time and time again, and yet he still completed 25 of 33 for 363 passing yards in that game with very little run game, too. That's another thing. They brought William Stanback from Montreal to shore up the run game. He only had 35 rushing yards on 11 carries, so they couldn't run the ball. Pass protection was awful. And then on the flip side, like I said, here's Cameron Dukes, really in his first game as a number 1, knowing he's a number 1 quarterback because of Chad Kelly being suspended for the first half of the year. And here's Cameron Dukes, 21 of 27, only 6 incomplete passes on 27 pass attempts, 254 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, no pass rush. They didn't get much pressure on him except for the one, which resulted in a BC scoop and score touchdown. Kadeem Carey ran the football effectively, 65 rushing yards for the Argos on 16 attempts, over 4 yards per carry. That's not going to get the job done as far as run defense is concerned. So the O-line and the D-line for BC were both terrible. That being said, you could also make a strong argument Toronto offensive line and defensive line as good as anybody in the CFL. And Calgary is not quite their opponent. That being said, I'll say this about Calgary. I liked what I saw from their O-line and their D-line last week in the victory against my Hamilton Tiger Cats, 32-24. They gave Jake Mayer pass time to throw the football. 87 rushing yards from Dedrick Mills, plus another 23 from B.J. Emmons, who was very good in a backup running back role. Clearly, I was concerned about the lack of weapons at receiver with Malik Henry suffering that season-ending injury in training camp, but all of a sudden, Clark Barnes steps up with 6 catches and 61 yards. Markin Michel, Reggie Bagleton, Cam Eccles, Jalen Philpott, the other Philpott, Cole Tucker. Maybe they're going to have a better receiving core than I thought. And look, their O-line and their D-line was very good. They got pressure on Hamilton. I will say this. They did not stop the run. Calgary, because James Butler did have 119 rushing yards. But their pass defense was good. Their pass rush was pretty solid. But the bottom line is BC just faced arguably the best offensive line in the CFL and arguably the best defensive line in the CFL in Toronto. And Calgary is not on that level. Calgary showed some flashes with the O-line and the D-line and their ability in the trenches against Hamilton, but they're not as good as Toronto. And here's another thing. Let me throw Hamilton's situation at you as far as their O-line. Chris Van Zyl retired. Joel Figueroa is banged up. Jordan Murray, a key offensive lineman, did not play for the Ticats last week. That's a huge issue. That O-line was very depleted last week. And then you flip it around to the Hamilton D-line. pass rush is a concern. You lost some players there. Ability to stop the run in question. Calgary's O-line and D-line did look solid last week, but how much of it was that Hamilton in the trenches was just not very good and not equipped personnel-wise due to injuries and retirement and other situations to play well? I think Calgary kind of feasted on a Hamilton team that wasn't well equipped in week 1 last week. The O-line was depleted, shorthanded, short-staffed, and the defensive line, I said coming into the year for Hamilton, I'm worried about their pass rush. I'm worried about their ability to consistently stop the run. Sure enough, against Calgary last week, what did we see from that Hamilton defensive front? Not much of a pass rush, couldn't stop the run. It's exactly what we saw. I think for BC, for as awful, and I mean truly awful, as that O-line and D-line performance was from the BC Lions last week against Toronto, this is a step down. They will not find it as difficult here on Saturday against the Calgary Stampeders in the trenches. They just went through the gauntlet that is Toronto. So I think you'll see BC, and Rick Campbell, who is, I think, a pretty good CFL head coach, he's going to go overboard to get this team to dial up and improve with their pass protection, their run blocking, and he knows that O-line was shit. You don't have to tell him. He knows, and the team knows. I think they're going to work at it, and I think they will do it, especially at home. They don't have to deal with the crowd noise or anything like that being on the road. I do think you're going to see BC improve the pass protection. I'm not concerned about the BC receiving corps. People had told me coming into the year that follow the team closely. I'm a little worried. They lost Lucky Whitehead. They lost Dominique Grimes. That's not where I'm worried. I'm worried about the trenches. They got to shore up the O-line, and the defense has to start getting some pressure on the quarterback. And we didn't see any of that shit last week. Not at all. That's where they've got to work. I'm not worried about their receiving corps. I think the receiving corps is good. I think the receiving corps is fine, even without Lucky Whitehead and Dominique Grimes from last year, who's now in Ottawa, as we talked about. They've still got enough there. I still like that receiving corps. Even, like I said, even with losing Whitehead and Grimes, you've still got, Justin McGinnis has stepped up and he's been great. Alex Hollins is a good receiver. Look at what Travis Fulgham, the kid out of Old Dominion, gave him last week. Javon Catoy is a good receiver. You've got enough weapons. The receiving corps I'm not concerned about. They need to shore up the pass protection. And for the love of God, and Darsh, my buddy in Vancouver, is right. Farhan Lalji on TSN was right as rain when he said this while that game was going on last week, BC and Toronto. Why the hell is Vernon Adams running short yardage on third down? Why? Explain that to me. Your season is Kaputski if he ever gets hurt this season. You can't risk needless injury to your prized possession at quarterback, big play VA, Vernon Adams, on 3rd and 1, putting him in there and taking unnecessary hits and risking needless injury. That's got to stop. I don't care who you put in there. Jake Dolegala, Chase Bryce, one of your other quarterbacks have to go in there for those 3rd and short situations. Vernon Adams can't keep taking those hits, especially when this O-line has got question marks, and he's taking hits just on regular snaps on 1st and 2nd down. So they've got to stop that. That's totally unnecessary, absolutely absurd. That he was pretty much under center for every third down short yardage play and every quarterback sneak in that game last week against Toronto. So that's something they can't have happen again. I really am leaning BC here because I think they're better than they showed, and I'm not at all convinced Calgary is all of a sudden this behemoth because they beat a Hamilton team that had defensive line issues, O-line injuries, and issues. And, 2 rookies starting in the secondary for Hamilton last week. Like, there were a lot of personnel issues for Hamilton last week. And not to mention Bo Levi Mitchell, he had a bad first half. A guy that had barely played any meaningful football the last year. I think it just took him a half to get the rust out of his system, get his legs under him, and get in the rhythm of things. And then you saw him play a lot better. Bo Levi Mitchell and the Hamilton offense did in the second half. And that's when they started to do all kinds of damage against Calgary's defense. I'm not sold yet on Calgary. Go into BC this week, take this team down to the wire, and maybe even beat them in BC. And then maybe we're talking about Dave Dickinson, Jake Mayer, who was my worst quarterback in the CFL last year by far. then we can talk about improvement and maybe this team being better in 2024. I'm not ready to say it yet after beating a mediocre Hamilton team that had all kinds of personnel issues last week. I'm at home as well. Now go on the road. And by the way, this place is going to be jumping. It's going to be sold out. Amar Doman, the great owner, brought in 50 Cent to perform at the home opener before the game. It's going to be a great environment for the BC Lions here in their home opener. I haven't moved on this game yet because I've seen all the money come in on Calgary. It opened 9.5 down to 8, 8.5, 7. But I'm leaning BC if I could ever get a 7 out of this, and I don't know if I will, but if I can get a 7 before kickoff, I'll be adding BC to the card. I do like the over in this game. I do. I think BC at home will score points. We saw it all of last year. I mean, how many times did this team score at least 30 points at home? That's just what they do. And I think they'll be able to do that here. You know they're going to work on the pass protection. I'm not convinced Calgary's pass rush is anywhere close to as good as Toronto and what we saw from the Argos last week, getting pressure on the quarterback. So I think BC is going to be able to move the ball. I mean, you go back to last year at home, 26 and 33 and 41 and 41. I mean, they have done, and they scored 41 against this Calgary defense in the playoff game last year, the West semifinal here in BC. 41-30 was the final score in that game. 71 points. It flew over the total. In fact, you look head to head between these two teams. We've seen 2 straight overs, all of them in BC. And by the way, the last 2 games in BC, 41-16, 41-30, way over the total. And BC going back to last year, since September 2nd, which was Labor Day weekend last year, 2023, BC is 9-1 to the over in their last 10 games. 9 overs and just 1 under for the BC Lions in their last 10 games, dating back to last year. So I like it's a high total, but I believe it's high for a reason. I think BC will get 28 plus, probably 30 plus in my opinion. Can you get 20 from Calgary? I'll tell you what, with BC's defensive concerns, secondary, lack of a pass rush, we did see Jake Mayer last week look better than he did pretty much any point last year for the most part. All of a sudden, big plays in the passing game. All of a sudden, Dedrick Mills able to run the football. Remember, BC couldn't stop the run last week against Toronto. So I think Calgary could have some offensive success here indoors at BC Place Stadium as well. So I'm already on the over 50.5. Again, series history, it's been higher scoring games the last few meetings. And again, that 9-1 to the over for the BC Lions in their last 10 games dating back to last year. And I'm very much leaning BC. I'm waiting to see if I can get a better number. All right, next up, final game for week 2 in the CFL, and I will be there, the home opener for my Hamilton Tiger Cats, Tim Hortons Field, hosting the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Hamilton 1-point home favorites, 48.5 the total in this game. Over is the clear choice for me in this game, and I understand why this total opened 47, and it's all the way up now to 48.5. It's already moved a 1.5. Saskatchewan, defensively, you already saw last week, especially in that fourth quarter against Edmonton, Saskatchewan is going to have a better defense this season. And they might already be better, but it's going to take time, and eventually they are going to be a really good defense. I still don't know if they're there just yet as far as being a great defense, Saskatchewan. But the fourth quarter defense was there against Edmonton. It's what allowed them to come back and win that game. But still, I think for Corey Mace, who's a defensive-minded head coach, did a great job as DC with Toronto before getting this job. It's still going to take them time to be strong for 4 quarters on that side of the ball, game in and game out. Their offense, though, man, I have huge expectations for this offense. Trevor Harris looked healthy. He, again, the offense wasn't finishing drives earlier in that game, but then once they got going, late third quarter into the fourth, I mean, you saw the potential with A.J. Ouellette running the ball, and he didn't even have a great game running the ball, but you see these weapons they have. They have so many better receivers than a lot of people think. But I said last week that watch out for Sean Bain. He is the one I definitely went out of my way to mention last week on the show. And wouldn't you know it, this guy, 5 receptions, 125 yards, receiving, 3 touchdown receptions, a hat trick of touchdown catches in the win against Edmonton. I was very impressed with this Jareth Stearns as well. 7 catches for him, 81 yards. Don't forget about what Kean Schaefer-Baker and Samuel Emelis, 2 pretty good receivers from last year's team, can do. They're back. They've got weapons, and Trevor Harris has weapons at receiver. And then you put that with Ouellette. The O-line is improved. They finally made a point to address that unit, which has been terrible for Saskatchewan the last few years. Jamarcus Hardrick brought in from Winnipeg, and there's some other additions they've made. All of a sudden, that O-line was better last week than what we saw for much of the last 2 years from the Riders' offensive line. Meanwhile, Hamilton, you look at last week against Calgary, and it's kind of a bad loss because I thought Calgary was the worst team in the CFL coming into the season, and I still think they might be, although they did look good. I got to see more from Calgary. I also have to see more from Hamilton before I'm ready to say they're going to be absolutely terrible. I think when you look at last week, they were missing a lot on defense. Pass rush was a concern. They were without Carthel Flowers at linebacker. Jamal Peters, by far their best, most experienced cornerback, who they got in the offseason from Toronto. He didn't play, and 2 rookies had to start in the secondary. The problem is Jamal Peters was still limited in practice. I'm not totally convinced anymore he's going to be able to return for this game. And if that's the case, that's trouble against Trevor Harris and this receiving core. Big trouble, and especially if the pass rush is a little bit weakened and coming into the season. However, on the other side, the Hamilton offense, they had a bit of a up and down first half. Keep in mind, Bo Levi Mitchell was basically disappointed, and he deserved a better fate. There were a couple of balls that were thrown to his receivers, to Bridges, Shamar Bridges, and even Tim White, who's as good as it gets. And both of them dropped passes last week that could have been either a touchdown or set Hamilton up first and goal. So Bo was victimized by some drop passes from his receivers. He still ended up finishing with 300 yards, 27 of 38. James Butler looked awesome. I think that's one of the best things to take out from that game last week, even though they didn't win. James Butler running the ball was phenomenal. They 13 carries. I think they can run it even more. They do have to work on this ratio, and I'm hoping Scott Milanovic commits to the run game this year, because Butler can be that good for them if they feed him. Because last week we saw 38 pass attempts, only 13 rush attempts for Butler. But again, they were trailing most of that game. I have faith that Scott Milanovic knows Butler's good. We've got to incorporate him. He's got to be a big focal point of the offense. We've got to have more pass-run balance than we've had in years past. I think he knows that. So I'm excited to see how Butler plays here. They do have to work on, the receivers have to work on their hand skills. I don't know what you have to do. Put WD-40 on their hands, whatever the fuck you have to do to make sure these guys stop dropping so many passes. You got to do it. Because Bridges dropped one, Tim White dropped one. But there's potential for this receiving core. They've got Bridges, they've got Tim White, Stephen Dunbar's back, Keandre Smith. He's another one that dropped one. But, there are some weapons here. Butler running the ball. I thought Bo Levi Mitchell, other than one really bad decision, which got intercepted, he played a pretty solid game, even in a losing effort. And I think this Hamilton team back home now can move the football and put up some points with this offense. Work on the drop passes, and if they do that, I think they'll be able to move the ball here against this Saskatchewan defense a little bit. So to me, the clear bet for me, side or total in this game, was the over, and I already moved on it. It's up to 48.5. From a side perspective, I am not betting it, but there is no way I'm stepping in front of Saskatchewan. This is one of the teams I was high on coming into the year. I have them over 7.5 wins. I have futures on them as a dark horse to win the West and the Grey Cup. That's how much I believe in the potential for this team, and Corey Mace as a head coach, and a healthy Trevor Harris leading an explosive offense, and how much I believe in their defense getting better as the season goes on. I'm not stepping in front of them. And they didn't even play a great game for 4 quarters last week, and they still won on the road in Edmonton. So if I had to bet a side, it would be Saskatchewan. But it's their second straight road game. It's Hamilton's home opener. All the talk is we've got to get off the schneid, win this one. I expect great focus, great intensity from the Ticats. But the problem is I'm not convinced of the better of these two teams. So I would still lean Saskatchewan here in this game, but I'm probably not betting the side. Just going to cheer on the Ticats as a fan and hope for points because I do think this game can get up and over the total. All right. Before we wrap up the show, just a quick something I want to say on the UFL championship game coming up on Sunday. It's the Birmingham Stallions and the San Antonio Brahmas. The game will be in St. Louis at the Dome there where the Battlehawks play. I know the Battlehawks were open to be in this championship game, but they were beaten soundly by Wade Phillips, Chase Garbers, and the San Antonio Brahmas last week. And now Birmingham looking for their third straight Spring Football League championship in a row, going for the three-peat. The last two were, of course, in the USFL, and now here they are looking to win a UFL championship with the merged USFL and XFL this season. Birmingham 3-point favorites, 41.5 the total, neutral field in St. Louis. I can't step in front of Birmingham laying only three. They want a three-peat. Skip Holtz, the head coach, wants a three-peat. Doesn't matter who's at. Well, I shouldn't say that. Adrian Martinez was terrible against Michigan at the start of the game in the conference championship last week. And Matt Corral had to rally Birmingham after a bad start to come back and win that game against the Michigan Panthers. Skip Holtz is going back to Adrian Martinez. I think he kind of have to because he had been playing awesome football all year until that bad game last week. You got to give him another chance. And I think because San Antonio's defensive line is very good, the ability to run when the pocket collapses and keep plays alive with his mobility that Adrian Martinez has, I think can probably be a good dynamic for Birmingham on offense against this very good front that the San Antonio Brahmas have. So I like the decision to go with Martinez, and I trust in Skip Holtz fully. He's been the best head coach with the best team in spring football the last few years. Who the fuck am I to argue with him? But San Antonio has been red hot. This is not going to be easy for Birmingham to complete the three-peat because the Brahmas have played awesome down the stretch. They've gotten better as the season's gone on. They're now fully healthy, especially on offense. Chase Garbers, the quarterback, is healthy. And Anthony McFarland, who has been a terrific running back for them, is now also healthy. And we saw the damage he can do running the football against St. Louis in the win last week. He was dynamic. He was explosive. And the Birmingham defense has been giving up more yards, more points later in the season. So I think when you look at San Antonio, especially with McFarland and Garbers being on the field, I think their offense is definitely a lot better than it was at times earlier in the season without them. The defense is going to be the one to watch for because San Antonio's defense is no joke. They have shut down a lot of really good teams, but this Birmingham offense is another level with Martinez. And if he struggles, you can go to Matt Corral, and he can get the job done. And you have Sternberger and some Dion and Kane, and you've got some other great receivers here with this Birmingham Stallions team. They know they know how to win these games. They've done it year in and year out the last 2 years, winning back-to-back championships. Look, put it this way. I actually was kind of thinking maybe I'll be on San Antonio here, but I was thinking San Antonio would be at least a 4.5 to 5 point underdog. I was not necessarily expecting the line to only be 3, with Birmingham only laying a field goal in this game. And because of where the number is, I do not feel comfortable at this number, -3, going against Birmingham. This team wants to, do something special, win 3 straight, and I just don't want to go against Skip Holtz and this Birmingham Stallions team, in a spot like this. So the lean for me is Birmingham. I'd probably bite the bullet and take them on the money line. I know it's -170 or so, but I just feel a little safer with that because we've seen a lot of these games, end in a 1 or 2 point victory, especially with, going for 2, going for 3-point tries, later in the game. And other things that can throw off the key number. So Birmingham money line potentially -170 for me, although I have a preseason future on Birmingham to win the championship. So I really have no need to bet it because I have my Birmingham to win the championship future from before the season pending. I'm going to go over 41.5. San Antonio's defense is tremendous, but Birmingham's offense is going to be the ultimate test to that San Antonio defense. And the San Antonio offense, I think, is a lot better now with both a healthy Chase Garbers at QB and Anthony McFarland at running back. Look at the difference those two have made for this Brahmas offense. So I think 41.5 with the total could be a little bit low. No weather issues. We're indoors, inside the dome, in St. Louis. So I think you can make a case for this one going over 41.5. Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern, UFL championship game, Birmingham and San Antonio. Definitely looking forward to that. All right, let's wrap it up. Best bet for CFL Week 2. We cashed our best bet last week. It was Saskatchewan Edmonton over as the best bet. I'm going to go Saskatchewan Hamilton over. 48 at DraftKings is the best number. It already has moved a little bit. I don't know if it's moved enough. I think the offenses both have their way in this game. I'll be in attendance. I think it'll be a very fun, exciting, higher scoring game Sunday night between these two teams. Let's go with the Riders and Ticats over the total. Saskatchewan Hamilton over 48. That is going to be my best bet here for CFL Week 2 on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. That's a wrap. Appreciate you guys joining us. Hit the like button on the way out. Subscribe at Dub Club. Get on board all sports subscription. NHL, NBA, MLB, CFL, NFL college football right around the corner, UFC a little bit, all that and more. Sign up at Dub Club. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ian Cameron. This has been another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy, and we'll see you again next week.